En Real ID, somos un equipo apasionado y comprometido que mediante la tecnología del entretenimiento participa en el desarrollo social y profesional de nuestros clientes, ofreciendo un servicio integral que responda a los nuevos retos y logre presencia activa en el comercio internacional. Aseguramos a nuestros clientes el correcto balance entre requerimientos para que nuestras plataformas tengan un óptimo desempeño. Buscamos la solución precisa para la convivencia de sistemas heredados y, en su caso, desarrollar la aplicación necesaria. Real ID creció acompañado y gracias a las necesidades del medio marítimo y portuario en cuestión de protección y seguridad. Cada uno de nuestros módulos está administrado por una inteligencia artificial simulada llamada Soleil, capaz de aprender casos y encontrar soluciones según los requerimientos del usuario final. For your convenience, please turn your cameras and microphones off during the webinar. For questions and comments, please use the chat located in the center of the bottom of your screen. We will now start the webinar. Por su comodidad, por favor mantenga cámaras y micrófonos apagados durante el evento. La comunicación queda abierta en el área de chat, ubicada en la parte central inferior de esta plataforma. En este instante comenzamos.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and or good afternoon in those places where it's past noon. Welcome everyone to today's webinar on cruise ports with the new pandemic frameworks. My name is Jorge Duran. I am the chief of the Inter-American Committee on Ports Secretariat, and it is my great pleasure to have three great representatives of the issue today that we're going to speak of. As we all know, with the pandemic of COVID-19 starting in 2020, one of the industries that was most affected and most damaged by the consequences of not traveling and reducing human contact was, of course, the cruise industry. As we know, the cruise industry was, against the ropes for a little bit. I must recognize one of our countries today, Barbados, for giving sanctuary to many of these cruise ships that were stuck there. And before I go on, I just want to say welcome and thank you to many of our friends. I see people from Jamaica, from other English Caribbean island states. I see people, Miguel Angel Osuna, Captain Osuna from Fidena in Mexico. I see Audrey McNeil from Jamaica. Welcome to you all and the rest. It'll be a pleasure to share the next hour with you all. I will turn it over soon to Monica Blanco so that she can introduce our speakers. But from the agenda, you know that we will have Captain Ana Laura Lopez, who is the Coordinator General for Ports and Merchant Marine of Mexico, of the Secretariat of the Navy. And she will be presenting, amongst other things, the wonderful practices of the Port of Cozumel. And then she will be followed by Ms. Jane Brome, Divisional Manager for Business Development and Strategy at Barbados Port Incorporated, which will relate their practices. And then at least but not last, Lieutenant Commander Daniel Librando from the International Port Security Liaison Officer of the United States Coast Guard, who are a strong ally of the SIP and will serve to complement, I'm sure, many of the points made. So without any further ado, I want to thank our three speakers. You all know the agenda. We will have a very, very brief presentations from each one of them, and then we will turn it over to you, the audience, for questions and answers that you might want our experts today to answer. I will do a little bit of house cleaning now, and housekeeping, I mean, for all of those who are interested either in the recording or the presentations. They will be available at the SIP portal as of tomorrow. So, don't worry about taking pictures with your phone of the different slides. They will be all available to you as of tomorrow. So again, I think this is very timely as the reactivation of the industry has occurred. We were just talking informally about the paradox of airplane tickets being stratospherically high, especially during the holidays, while the cruise industry is offering many sort of incentives for you to go on these vacations. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. So anyhow, without further ado, and I don't want to take any more time, I will pass on the floor to Ms. Monica Blanco from the CIP so that she can introduce our speakers and follow up. We will be here at the end. Remember, you can ask questions through the chat function of the platform. And last but not least, I'd like to thank our technological partner, Real ID, for their support in running this conference. So with that, Monica, the floor is yours. And again, thank you to Laura, Daniel, and Jane. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jorge, for the warm welcome. Thank you to our panelists, and welcome to all our participants joining us today. My name is Monica Blanco. I'm a project coordinator at the Inter-American Committee on Ports, and I'm extremely honored to be moderating today's webinar and be sharing screen with such distinguished panelists. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Captain Ana Laura Lopez. Ana Laura Lopez Bautista began her training as a technician in navigation and fishing, graduating from the Center for Technological Studies of the Sea as the only woman of her generation. She is graduate of the Nautical School of Tampico and holds the titles of Extra Master and Geography and Hydrographic Engineer. With more than 20 years of experience working at all levels in the Mexican Merchant Marine, she has served as an onboard master, second and third officer, chief mate, among other positions, navigating vessels of different types and tonnages. Conveying with her outstanding leadership during the last years of her professional development, she has held positions as Chief of Navigation and Port Monitoring in the Regional Port of Veracruz and Head of the Port Captaincies of Puertos, Oaxaca, and Playa del Carmen and Isla Mujeres, Quintana Roo. On December 1st, 2020, the President of Mexico appointed Captain Lopez as General Coordinator of Ports and Merchant Marine. Furthermore, in 2021, she was announced as Outstanding Woman in the Maritime and Port sectors by the SIP Secretariat. Thank you for joining us today, Captain. It is a pleasure to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thanks to you, Monica. Thanks for this new opportunity to talk with you and give us some information important for us here in the cruise industry. Well, we're going to start. Can you put the presentation, please? Thanks. Well, do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. COVID-19 is not the first international crisis faced by the cruise industry. In the 21st century, the cruise industry needed to cope with the consequences of the 2001 terrorist attacks of September 11th. On 2002, SARS epidemic, the H1N1 2009 influenza pandemic, and the unprecedented worldwide COVID-19 crisis. This pandemic has been the largest crisis faced by the cruise industry to date. There are no precedents, neither in size or in consequences. By now, and according with the World Health Organization, there had been more than 623,396 confirmed cases and over 6.5 million lives lost to the disease. Mexico has been one of the most affected countries with 344,230 deaths up to date. To begin with this presentation, I will share a general review regarding the importance of the cruise ship industry for Mexico and how the COVID-19 pandemic affected these operations. Then I will share some of our country's best practices and how the industry has been recently resumed. Before I go to detail, I would like to explain a bit of our port distribution. We have in total 103 ports and 15 terminals. All of these, 16 federal port administrations, called ASIPONAS, 6 state port administrations, called APIS, 1 municipal port administration, WIMAS, 1 Fonatur port administration. What is this? It's the National Tourism Fund Organization. This fund have the administration of Huatulco, 2 ports in process of becoming an ASIPONA. Next one, please. Thank you. With infected ships, hill crew members and passengers around the world, as well as the first deaths on board. Cruise ships stopped one by one at the end of March 2020 in different parts of the world. After that, cruise lines dead with sending crew members and passengers home, while many borders were closed. The cruise industry plays an innovative and important role in the world economy, as well as many local economies. Some cities and companies are cruise-driven and provide everything for this industry. This industry has also made large contributions to different communities and stakeholders around the world. The shutdown of the cruise industry due to COVID-19 impacts every country where it plays a part. Particularly in Mexico, the tourism industry plays a very important role. Despite the complications experienced during the pandemic, Mexico ranked as the 3rd most visited destination during 2020, even though it meant 46.1% less compared to 2019. Mexico also managed to rank in place number 7 globally in attracting tourist currency during 2021, adding $19,796 million and advancing 10 positions in this period. Has in 2019 was in 17th place. Destinations with the highest demand and spillover are Cozumel, Mexico City, Guadalajara, San Jose del Cabo, and Puerto Vallarta, whilst Cozumel, Ensenada, Mahahual, and Los Cabos are the top destination for cruise ships. Next one, please. Moving on with how important the cruise ship industry is for Mexico, I would like to share some numbers since 2019. According with the country's National Institute of Statistics and Geography and the Mexican Central Bank, a lot of foreign currency capture for international travelers hasn't reached the pre-pandemic level, $24.6 billion in 2019. The current amount represents a growth of approximately 80% of the foreign currency received in 2020. In addition, the average tourist spending reached an all-time high, $567, an increase of 14% since 2019. Particularly for the cruise ship industry, such dynamic replicates back in 2019. 2,951 cruise ships arrived in Mexican ports. It means 10.5% more arrivals with regards to the previous year, 2018. However, during 2020 and 2021, the number of cruise arrivals were only a bit more than 800 for each year. Of course, these numbers had important repercussions for those who could benefit from this industry. Economic impacts of the cruise industry originate from the direct, indirect, and induced contributions to economic development. Such contributions include visitor expenditures, investments, intermediary purchases, and related industries, such as entertainment, expedition, and tourist attractions, with clear effects on gross domestic product and employment. In the next slide, for it, please. Next. In this slide, we can appreciate historically, since 2015, how tourists and tourist arrivals suffered an abrupt drop starting in the first quarter of 2020. Mexico's Secretary of Tourism expects 6 million cruise passengers and 2,313 cruise ships will arrive in the country, contributing $408.4 million in foreign currency, 286.2% more than in 2021. Just from January to March 2022, 1,607,000 passengers and 781 cruise ships have arrived, almost of them to the ports of Cozumel, Majagual, Cabo San Lucas, Puerto Vallarta, Mazatlán, and Progreso. Next one, please. Sure enough, the tourism sector represents a positive outlook. From January to December 2021, 31,876,000 international tourists arrived, 31.3% more than in 2020, to which the World Tourist Organization concludes that Mexico was the second most visited tourist destination, only behind France. For the first quarter of 2022, 8,576,000 visitors arrived, 48% more compared to the same period of 2021, which continues to show a notable recovery path. As far as foreign direct investment is concerned, in 2021, tourist investment reached $2,054.9 million, an all-time high. It represented 6.5% of total foreign direct investment participation that hadn't been seen since 2012. According with the Secretary of Tourism, the tourist branches is where the most investment was made, where apartments and houses furnished with hotel services, 61.5%, and hotels with other integrated services, 24.2%. The hotel sector is especially important since contributes with 28.7% of the tourism's gross domestic product. In 2021, hotel occupancy was 41.4%, 15.3% points higher than 2020. The states with the highest amounts of hotel foreign direct investment are Nayarit, Mexico City, Baja California Sur, Yucatán, Quintana Roo, and Guerrero. At the end of April, the American company Witham revealed that between 10 and 20 hotels will be installed in Mexico in this year. Currently, there are several tourism projects and government and private organizations on the doorstep, and they are only waiting for environmental authorization. They consist in 9 projects for 643.1 million pesos distributed in Quintana Roo, Sinaloa, Baja California, Oaxaca, and Coahuila. In them, preparation of land of the subsequent construction of ordinary education works, boutique hotels, housing, chapels, medical centers, university museums, central squares, walkways, green areas, and the expansion of infrastructure in the port of Mazatlán, Sinaloa, to receive more cruise ships and ferries, as well as the construction of a convention center in Oaxaca to promote business tourism and conventions. Next one, please. Looking back briefly, the first official cases of COVID-19 were recorded during the first days of December 2019, when the World Health Organization was informed of cases of pneumonia in Wuhan, China, with no known cause. Weeks later, World Health Organization declared the rapidly spreading COVID-19 outbreak as public health emergency of international concern on January 13, 2020. On February 28, the first case of COVID-19 was reported in Mexico. During the first months of COVID-19, global health authorities, government agencies, and the public were unsure of how the disease will spread and how it will impact everyday life. Soon after, cruise companies shut down operations. To tackle the pandemic, strict measures were put in place around the world. Social distancing and travel restrictions began to come into force in March 2020, along with advice on proper hand washing techniques. However, these measures were predicted to only slow the spread of the virus, whilst the first vaccine trials began. At the time when our country declared emergency phase, the Mexican government published on the official gazette an epidemiologic traffic light guide system, allowing individuals and business understand and confirm if their activities could resume or not. This traffic light monitoring system was made of 4 colors. Red color, only essential economic activities were allowed. Orange color, in addition to essential economic activities, companies of non-essential economic activities were allowed to work with 30% of the personnel of the operation, always taking account the maximum care measures for people with a greater risk of presenting serious disease of COVID-19, and open public spaces operated with reduced capacity. Yellow color, all work activities were allowed, caring of people with a higher risk of presenting serious disease of COVID-19. Open public spaces was open on regular basis, and closed public spaces would operate with reduced capacity. Green color, all activities were allowed, considering the recommendation of safety distance. It is also important to say that during the last week of December 2020, Mexican authorities announced of country will let cruise ships dock at its ports, even if passengers tested positive to the coronavirus, and also allowed asymptomatic travelers to disembark on its shores. Such a statement was endorsed by the President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who confirmed a policy of solidarity and fraternity under the principle of non-discrimination. The announcement came after 2 cruise ships with COVID-19 outbreaks were refused permission by Jalisco state authorities in the previous weeks to disembark passengers or crew at Puerto Vallarta. On June 16, 2021, Caribbean cruise ships resumed operation, and by August 2022, cruise ship activity in Mexico had already 70% announced capacity. Next one, please. By August 2022, 3,807,000 cruisers have arrived into our country. However, the Mexican Caribbean has managed to outperform other ports in the country, including Ensenada and Cabo San Lucas. Without a doubt, Cozumel has been gaining back its place. Since before the pandemic, it was ranking as the world's busiest port of all of cruise ships. And this year has definitely seen several tourist records broken in Cancun and the Mexican Caribbean, which have attracted more cruise ship travelers than any other part in Mexico. The government of Mexico, the next one, please. The government of Mexico has won the state of municipal authorities worked together to establish 13 humanitarian bridges as a joint support mechanism to help more of 2,000 passengers and seafarers move back to their place of residence. From March to May 2020, 1,863 persons from different countries disembarked in Puerto Vallarta, 154 in Cozumel, 49 in Puerto Progreso, and 98 Mexicans and 149 foreigners received support from Mexican and US authorities to leave San Diego, California. As I previously mentioned, this mechanism demonstrated the willingness of President López Obrador to help cruise ships disembark in Mexican ports strictly under humanitarian reasons. The secretaries of the Navy, the military, health, foreign affairs, the interior, transport, and communication, among other authorities, worked together with shipping companies, the maritime community, the governments of various countries under this protocol. Some of the benefited list includes the Rotterdam, MS Europe, Amsterdam, Amsterdam, Marella Explorer 2, Celebrity Eclipse, Disney Fantasy, Carnival Glory, and the Koningsdam. Some other vessels have also received support for port services such as provisioning, towage, pilotage, and others. Along with the discussed support mechanism, onboard adjustments had to be taken into considerations, such as air purification systems, use of insulated cabins, improved hospitals, cleaning and disinfecting protocols, bubble tours, special vaccination campaigns for seafarers. Another continuous activity has been monitoring COVID-19 infections on board cruise ships. The next one, please. These graphics show us how is moving the COVID-19 infections on board the cruise ship that arrives our country. During the present year, numbers have diminished considerably for crew members and passengers. Next one, please. Moving to on good news. Since June 2021, when cruise ship activities were resumed, Mexican ports has been struggling to reach pre-pandemic travel numbers. However, earlier this year, Mexican Caribbean ports geared off a potentially record-shattering summer season. It now looks like those estimates have materialized into an extent, but there is still room before reaching the 5 million passenger record set previously. Puerto Vallarta, for example, has welcomed his first triple arrival of the season. Next one, please. On the other side, Puerto Chiapas, located in the Mexican South Pacific, welcomed the Ocean Victory last October 14. Next one, please. Manzanillo hasn't fallen behind and also received its season's first cruises. Skyrocketing travel demand has caused travel chaos for many islands over the summer, and now cruise companies are facing the same issue. Even some cruise liners have had to cancel departures over staffing shortages, with Princess Cruises announcing that it plans to cancel 11 departures between September and November this year, for example. Next one, please. Finally, I would like to make my final remarks with this graphic. You all know how cruise ship industry is capital intensive and has enormous dependency supply chains that serves to improve many ports of coal economies, hires an immense quantity of people worldwide, and provides leisure and entertainment. The cruise industry has the right to resume, but it must resume with responsibility, with coordinated plans, with high health protocols, and with a good communication plan. The way this industry is striving to address the current challenges demonstrate its capacity to innovate to make the challenges and the current crisis. It's making the cruise experience healthier and safer for its guests, crew, and the communities they affect. Studying COVID-19 and the cruise industry is a work in progress, and there are many opportunities to build this field of knowledge. Such approximations should take into consideration all the stakeholders, such as people in charge of ports, of coal, and the municipalities, executives from the cruise industry, sales force, companies in the supply chain, passengers, and crew members. There are also great opportunities to reevaluate the trends before and after COVID-19, and how these trends could affect the customer's cruise experience. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Captain. It was very impressive to see the relevance of the cruise industry in Mexico and its recovery after the pandemic. Looking forward to discussing more about the challenges ports are facing in the Q&A session. And just a reminder to today's audience, please feel free to leave your questions in the chat as we will be addressing later in the session. Thank you so much, Captain. And next, thank you. And then our next panelist is Jane Brom. Jane Brom is currently serving as Divisional Manager, Business Development and Strategy at Barbados Port Inc. She has a solid background in market research, trade and economics, strategic planning, business development, and corporate communications. She has worked at the Barbados Investment and Development Corporation as Manager of Research, where she conceptualized and executed the annual Innovate Barbados Conference aimed at promoting creative ideation to overcome the persistent lag in national innovation, as well as the Going Global program, increasing Barbados exports by over 10% over an 18-month period. Among her major undertakings since joining the ports in 2018 are the 2020 corporate rebrand, the introduction of crisis communications standard operating procedures, governing critical incidents, development of the customer service charter in line with ISO 9001 quality management standards, and design of the company's stakeholder engagement framework. She worked as one of the architects in crafting the corporate business plan 2021-2026, which outlines those projects and activities critical to diversifying port revenue and enhancing operational efficiencies. Thank you so much, Jane, for joining us today. It is an honor to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Monica. It's really great to be here. Just meant to say good morning to our fellow distinguished panelists, colleagues, and friends. Good morning to everyone. We really look forward to sharing our experience with you as it relates to COVID during and after COVID-19. As you know, can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So as it relates to COVID-19, the Port of Bridgetown is really Barbados' premier gateway to international commerce. And as the island's only multi-purpose port, we serve as the major economic driver, handling more than 90% of our nation's trade and really all of its cruise operations. So I'm going to share with you today some of the major lessons that we would have learned coming out of COVID-19. The onset of the pandemic for us not only put our health and safety practices to the test, but threatened to disrupt Barbados's lifeline for the importation of food, medical supplies, nearly all of our imports for the productive sectors and foreign exchange earnings from exports, as well as erased all of our earnings with the cessation of commercial cruising. Prior to the first reported Barbados case on March 17, 2020, we had executed a wide-scale COVID-19 sensitization awareness campaign, which was launched here in Bridgetown for the entire port community under the guidance of the Ministry of Health and Wellness. As an essential service, we knew the importance of maintaining our core business of cargo and cruise, but more than that, we knew that we could only do it if we safeguarded the health of our employees. And ever since then, our ability to adapt and really work against the odds has been uniquely tested. We were determined, however, as a port, not only to survive this disruption to our lives, but to emerge a more resilient port for it. COVID-19 has taught us many valuable lessons, some applicable not only for today, but well into the future. First lesson COVID-19 taught us was that we need to put people first. Our primary interest has always been the safety of our team. As the disease forced the shutdown of the country and the implementation of emergency management protocols by government, we had to adapt our work arrangements and make systemic adjustments to reduce the risk of transmission, all while ensuring the delivery of essential cargo and the seamless movement of people. It was imperative that we shifted our corporate culture towards being more considerate and health conscious. Our work life became considerably different to what used to be our norm. And the sobering message we took away in all that has happened is that we all needed to at all times uphold our strict health and safety protocols, both on and off port. And we continue to hold ourselves accountable for keeping our port and our loved ones safe. By putting people first, our second takeaway was learning the true meaning of providing safe harbor. The Port of Bridgetown's supporting role during the pandemic is well known in the cruise industry. When the suspension of cruising was announced, the major challenge for many of the vessels at sea was to find in just a few days a suitable port where they could repatriate passengers and crew, and also bunker fuel, load provisions, and offload waste. The Port of Bridgetown was one of the few ports in the Caribbean which remained open to cruise vessels throughout the pandemic, and that could offer the services and facilities they required. As a home porting hub for several of the major cruise lines, Barbados has all the requisite elements in place to facilitate high-volume passenger and luggage transfers efficiently between the seaport and the airport, including ground transportation, airlift, and security screening. The government of Barbados therefore made the decision to offer safe harbor to vessels during what mushroomed into a humanitarian crisis. Working through the finer details of repatriation protocols to make this happen mandated dramatically increased collaboration across several agencies: government ministries of health, tourism, and maritime affairs, the customs and immigration departments, the Grantley Adams International Airport, local port agents, as well as private sector agencies involved in cruise and ground transportation. It was this united approach that enabled the Port of Bridgetown to serve as the proverbial port in the storm at the height of the pandemic, hosting up to 36 vessels, among them the world's largest cruise ships, and repatriating approximately 21,000 passengers and crews to their respective countries. That unity and collaboration remains among us today. While the ships were berthed in port or anchored offshore, mandatory reporting requirements were implemented for vessels, including frequent updates from all ships on the health status of the crew members on board. Barbados also fulfilled its obligations under the International Health Regulations 2007 to render medical care to anyone who became ill on board a cruise ship home porting here. When persons disembarked for repatriation, an exclusive zone was secured in port where all logistics and boarding of ground transportation were facilitated. The Barbados Police Service and the Barbados Defense Force provided logistical and ground transport support for repatriation operations, moving persons directly from the seaport to the airport in a sterile convoy. That was another example of our coming together as a united force. Just one moment, please. Though much of the emphasis during the pandemic was on public safety, certain unprecedented events reminded us also of the need to protect our fragile environment. As you know, some cruise lines requested the extended stays here in Barbados until they could return to their respective home ports. And at peak, there were 15 vessels in layout. The huge anchors, together with the typical swinging motion of the anchor chains, were estimated to have caused damage to thousands of square meters of the island's coral reefs. It was an event unforeseen and unlikely to occur ever again on the scale of that which was observed. But it really forced us to critically assess our vulnerability, viability, and responsiveness. A new stated government policy now prohibits cruise ships from anchoring on the coral-rich west coast and restricts anchoring to designated anchorage points on the south coast of the island. Ships that cannot be accommodated in the anchorage are now being asked to use their dynamic positioning system, which allows them to maintain their position without dropping anchor or to drift offshore. These measures ensure the future protection of our reefs. Barbados has also been engaging with cruise lines to partner on sustainability initiatives, which are aimed at preserving our island's ecosystems. Lesson number 4 for us was to invest in technology and digital solutions. While Barbados's borders remained open during 2 periods of national lockdown, That accelerated our need to provide secure, reliable, and efficient services with safety in mind. As the pandemic triggered restrictions and other disruptions across ports, shipping, and supply chains, we escalated our plans for the development of digital solutions. Anticipating that health and hygiene protocols would likely remain in place for the foreseeable future, touchless service delivery and investments in digital technology have for us proven to be the golden bridge to business continuity. The manual process for outward vessel clearances was abandoned, and an electronic vessel clearance platform was developed to allow relevant personnel to grant permission for vessels to arrive or depart. All vessel clearances and processing is now facilitated electronically. In an effort to further minimize personal contact, BPI also created an electronic payment platform and instituted an electronic appointment system for cargo collection. That system now further facilitates joint cargo inspections to be undertaken by the customs, port health authorities, and regulatory agencies, and reduces the time in facilitating that cargo clearance. This joint approach now continues and will prove critical to our provisioning operations to the cruise vessels. And that brings us to lesson number 5, which is embracing course correction. We knew it is inevitable that sometimes the best laid plans will be derailed by unexpected life-changing events. In this case, it was a global pandemic. COVID-19 forced us to take a complete relook at our playbook and our standard operating procedures. Our emergency response plan and our crisis communication SOPs were reinforced to show up our response against the threat of cross-border health threats. New protocols were developed and instituted for cruise operations, as well as the servicing of yachts, in line with the Ministry of Health and Wellness and the IMO requirements. Frontline employees in the marine services and terminal operations units were trained in best practice protocols and offered guidance in the proper use of PPE and operations during berthing, mooring, unmooring, and the working of vessels. Our PPE policy was re-examined to ensure the reduction and elimination of any risk, and all these now continue to serve us well in building our future resistance. Our cruise business traditionally represents approximately 22% of annual port revenues. For the wider port community of transport service providers, retailers, attractions, artisans, restaurants, and ancillary services, it represents a far greater percentage of earnings, as much as 100% in many instances. There are also local manufacturers and distributors under provisioning contracts, and service providers such as those providing bunkering and waste haulage that were significantly impacted. It was therefore economically vital that an adapted form of responsible cruising return to our region sooner rather than later. We therefore worked doubly hard with our cruise line partners and the Ministry of Health and Wellness to ensure that the Port of Bridgetown was among the first destinations ready for the resumption of cruise business. We instituted the requisite protocols to ensure vessel operations and operational spaces were safe and without risk to health, and welcomed our first commercial cruise since March 2020 on June 7th, 2021. BPI during this time also supported the American Cruise Task Force in developing guidelines to assist destinations in developing their own cruise business resumption protocols. We reinforced our infrastructure at our home port terminal and main entry gate and enhanced facilities for passenger flow screening, testing, as well as quarantine, all in an effort to welcome future travelers in a post-COVID environment. And finally, lesson number 6. The COVID-19 pandemic had a serious impact on port performance. With the suspension of commercial cruising, 906 vessel calls were recorded at the end of our financial year 2021, as opposed to 1,342 at the end of March 2020. Cruise passenger numbers, which peaked at over 850,000 at the end of December 2019, stood at 0 at the end of March 2021. This, of course, resulted in reduced revenues. We therefore had to seriously consider the need to pursue new activities beyond our core cruise and cargo business. Our 5-year business plan has therefore incorporated new business ventures which could contribute to the recovery of the economic activity on which our port depends. That would be new investments in international trade, tourism, logistics, manufacturing. Some of the major cruise tourism related projects under consideration now include expansion of our shallow draft marina for yachts and pleasure craft. That project was initiated in February this year and is slated for completion in 2024. We're also considering construction of a boat repair facility and commercialization of our lighthouses as part of new onshore attractions. We're also increasing our engagement with cruise partners through the major industry trade shows and conventions as part of the thrust to develop new cruise business and position the Port of Bridgetown as a preferred home port. Efforts are also ongoing to boost opportunities for provisioning and onshore spend. Our winter cruise season 2023 officially began this month and extends through to April next year. We are looking forward to a successful season free of restrictions and closer to the normalcy as we know it. We expect approximately 365 cruise vessel calls and approximately 700,000 cruise passengers, as sailings have not yet returned to full capacity in the industry. Cruise lines are, however, reporting dramatically improved occupancy based on bookings since the relaxation of COVID protocols. The onset of the pandemic forced us at the Port of Bridgetown to escalate development plans to ensure our own business continuity. Accelerating the pace of change, prioritizing innovation and strategic flexibility in line with our long-term vision has made us a more resilient port. It allowed us the opportunity to review our operations and establish systems and standards that now enable us to pivot more quickly in the event of future challenges. It is important that we as an industry continue to use the knowledge gained from COVID to enhance our preparedness for potential future health risks in ports and ships, and to create a new roadmap for greater sustainability in cruise tourism. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Jane. It was so interesting to see BPI's comprehensive lessons learned and successfully implemented practices for recovery and business continuity. Thank you so much for sharing. Another reminder to all of our participants, the presentations will be uploaded and available for you in our SIP portal. I will send you the link in the chat in a couple of minutes. Now, I would like to introduce our last but not least panelist, Lieutenant Commander Daniel Librando. He currently serves as the International Port Security Liaison Officer Coordinator at U.S. Coast Guard Atlantic Area, Portsmouth, Virginia. His duties include overseeing the office and staff responsible for assessing the effectiveness of anti-terrorism measures implemented in partner nation ports throughout the Caribbean, Central, and South America. In addition to these duties, his office further increases the international awareness of maritime security and champions best practices for improving maritime governance throughout the world. Prior to this assignment, Lieutenant Commander Librando was an international port security liaison officer based out of Coast Guard Activities Europe, located in Brussels, Netherlands, from 2019 to 2022. His portfolio of countries include the Democratic Republic of Congo, Republic of Tunisia, Federal Republic of Nigeria, State of Kuwait, State of Libya, Republic of the Gambia, and Georgia. For this assignment, Lieutenant Commander Librando completed an intensive French language training program at the U.S. Department's Foreign Service Institute in Arlington, Virginia. Thank you, Lieutenant, and it is an honor to have you, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Monica. I really appreciate that intro. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and good morning. So sort of to round out the presentations you've already listened to from our other two esteemed presenters, just want to shift gears a little bit, talk more about the security side of it. That's the business I'm in. You heard a lot about the safety and restarting operations, so hopefully we can talk about some best practices that we see as a program. We travel, my program travels all over the world, not just the Americas, but all over, and we kind of compile some best practices, and we share those best practices with our partner nations. So I've tried to focus on some cruise ship specific best practices as we emerge from the COVID pandemic and restart operations. And some of these maybe you've seen before, maybe you do, and some of them may be new. And that's what I'm hoping for, that maybe you pull one or two, three things away from my presentation. So without further ado, try to share my screen. Okay, does everybody see that full screen?
Yes, we can. Oh, no, sorry.
Okay.
It's not in presentation mode.
Let's see here. It's not in presentation mode.
Commander, if I may, sometimes we have this trouble. And what works sometimes is for you to open the presentation fully before sharing your screen. See if that works.
Okay. And then go back.
Once you have it on presentation mode, then you share your screen, and that should do it.
It's on. Sorry, if it's on full mode, then how do I go back? Because it's on the full screen. Sorry about that.
No worries. We'll ask our technical support team to share the presentation.
How about now?
Now it works.
Okay.
Now there you go.
Yes. Now we can see it. Yes.
Okay. So like I said, best practices. So hopefully we get a little bit out of this for each of you or each of the participants. So kind of start with that layered security. It's not just any one thing that is going to provide a really robust and secure port for you, right? It really starts with the manifest being shared ahead of time, in advance. The proof of identity as the ship enters the port. You know, you're working with a ship handler, the agent, things like that. It's on a schedule. All the passengers and crew baggage has already been screened to come on the vessel. You're setting restricted areas aboard the ships and then anticipating that ship's arrival for some restricted areas in the port. And we'll talk about that some more. So really it's a layered approach. If you think about it as a system, you know, if one system fails, you have another system in place. If two systems fail, hopefully you keep going on. So that's what that graphic is supposed to represent, to look at it holistically. So this is a very busy slide, and I'm not asking you to read each of the color bars. The point of this is to show you in America, the TSA, that's how they layer their security. So I guess the two that matter most is the very top, it says intelligence, and the very bottom, it says passengers. And it just shows you how the airline, how TSA, the Transportation Security Administration in America, how they do security. Some kind of similar to the cruise ships, but it just shows you all the different layers. Of course, nothing's impossible, but you know, a lot of lessons learned in the past few years. So we'll start with the first best practice. So the waterside security. We have a presence here of a small boat, an armed boarding officer. That officer has the authority and jurisdiction to go on vessels coming into the nation's waters. So there's no questions of authority. We have a high value unit. That's the QM2, I believe, going into New York Harbor. So we got patrols. That's an officer presence. People see that from shore. People see that on the ship. Other boats see that. We got presence, law enforcement presence, and that's all they're doing. They're providing the waterside security, making sure nobody's getting too close, and the vessel can transit unhampered under pilot to their berth. So that's something to consider first off, having that officer presence. We might have some dive teams on standby, maybe just doing some training to do some sweeps, underwater sweeps of the area, which they can consider training. If the public sees it, they think they're really doing some operations, but they don't know that it's training per se. Using the ROV, the remote operated vehicle, just to sweep the pier, looking for any suspicious activity, any divers, just scuba divers or snorkelers that might have wandered too far from a resort into a restricted area. So they're doing some detection there. You can partner with, we in America partner with the Navy, the U.S. Navy, because they have some additional assets that they can bring to bear. It's more in a training capacity because they don't have jurisdiction. The military doesn't have jurisdiction in America to enforce domestic laws. But again, the public sees it. People might see it on the ship, feel a little bit more secure. So security zones, that's the zone around the vessel as the vessel moves. That's what is being enforced to keep people out, keep people away. People, we all see these people who rent the jet skis and they're just zooming around and they don't really know what they're doing. So we have a security zone around these vessels. We don't want them zipping around, getting too close. But it might also be somebody who acts like they don't know what they're doing and they're really trying to get close. So you never know. You never know if they're acting innocent, but they're really wanting to get right up to the ship for whatever reason. So we have patrols on the water. We'll use local law enforcement. It might be U.S. Coast Guard, but we'll employ local law enforcement to keep that security zone active as the ship moves, even while it's at anchor. So while it's at anchor, we don't want anybody getting too close. So we use 100 yards, like a fixed zone, about 100 yards around the vessel at anchor. We can't get in, and that's broadcast. And the ship's crew on the bridge help broadcast that to stay away. Restricted anchorage areas, kind of talked about that a little bit. So maybe the cruise ship decides to anchor because of wind or heavy weather before they come into port. Maybe there's not a berth for them. So I think another presenter already talked about that, but having designated anchorage areas. We can't accept you. You need to anchor and you can only anchor here. That area is swept. That area, maybe we have CCTVs that can reach out that far. It's a coordinated system. It's not ad hoc. It's not at random. So because of that, maybe there's tendering operations that go from that area. That area is approved. It's a direct route. It's not cutting across businesses or resorts or whatnot. So again, this is a coordinated effort ahead of time. The vessel traffic service, VTS, we'll see that in the bigger ports. A traffic separation scheme you might see on the navigational charts. It's like a big roadmap. It tells you who's coming, who's going. You check in with your VTS radio. Kind of like the airplanes. Do I have permission to land? Kind of like that. Can I transit the area? So these things are again coordinated through a central command center. In the United States, the Coast Guard has the authority to direct vessel movement. So that's done at the federal level. But we might have some local representatives in there in the command center as well. But they're directing naval ships, they're directing cruise ships and container ships, submarines maybe in some places. So very, very busy ports have this. This isn't everywhere, but it's a tool. It's a tool we use to know who's there, who should be, who shouldn't be. Do they have tugs in route or escort tugs, pilot boats? So it's a visual of the whole port operations. So now we're getting into the cruise ships itself. So you got control areas. to question people on unauthorized access to some areas on the vessels, things like that. We might do spot checks to make sure that vessels are enforcing the unauthorized areas. Are they allowing passengers to go in the crew areas? That should be a restricted area on the vessel. The engine room, the bridge, wherever the vessel security plan is maintained, all restricted areas. So a vessel in U.S. ports, we have the authority, the Coast Guard has the authority to go on and do some unannounced visits, spot checks. So in your legislation, I'm not sure if you have that in your country, but to do an unannounced visit and making sure things are being appropriately managed on board the vessel. So collaboration with other agencies, right? We have the manifest ahead of time, maybe from the ship's agent. That manifest goes through U.S. Customs. They're looking for, no-fly list passengers. They're looking at visas. So the point is, different agencies have different authorities. It's a system that's in place. This must happen, and therefore the next step. This will happen, and then the next step. And the ship has clearance to come in. So establishing those partnerships with your sister agencies that have other authorities and jurisdictions ahead of time. As the pandemic ends and cruise ship traffic increases, having these established programs in place will just facilitate the flow of people and keep those cruise ships on schedule. Talk about this a little bit. So you'll see that card there in the top left, or we call that a transportation worker identification credential. It's something that is, there's a background check, and people who work on the facility have this card. It has their name, their picture, and they can swipe in and out of facilities, where they can go on a facility. So you don't have people wandering around, but they're vetted, and the background check knows, like, okay, this person doesn't have authority or approval to be on a facility. So that's not the Coast Guard. That's not a port. You're relying on other agencies. You're relying on law enforcement or military or whomever in your country has that authority to check Interpol or check some kind of international database of people, to have credentials to board a facility or passengers to come onto a facility if you so choose to carry it that far. The badges themselves, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's always a weaker point that we see, is that passengers come in and off, on and off vessels, at a port call, they go ashore, they might buy some souvenirs and have some excursions, they come back, and that process is muddy, is gray. So who's checking them when they come back? Are their bags and all their souvenirs checked? How do we know that they're a passenger, that they're not just embarking at that port call? So there's some, I think, best practices later in my presentation about that, but just the point here is having the identification badges, having a means to show who's a crew. Is it color coded? That crew cannot go to the bridge. That crew is only for the dining room or whatever. Is this a passenger? Okay, and this passenger ID doesn't expire yet. Okay, that they should be on the vessel. So a means to do that, and getting in and off port facilities during a port call was something additional that we can talk about a little bit later. Declaration of security. So of course, hopefully everybody sort of understands what this is, but it's an agreement between the cruise ship, the ship itself, and the facility that says who is going to do what in terms of security. Or at nighttime, does the ship need to put their lights on because your facility has no lighting? Okay, well, let's agree to that now. So now at nighttime, we know Declaration of Security says for lighting, the cruise ship illuminates the pier area, so that there's no confusion about who is doing what. So hopefully that's something that's a regular practice. That's something that's taken very seriously between the cruise ship and the facility, and done consistently. And one more thing with this is communications. What channel is everybody operating on? Is there an emergency frequency? What do we do in an emergency? Where is the alarm? Who sets the alarm? Things like that. All figured out ahead of time. So looking at the supply chain in the stores. So this is, of course, is not passenger baggage. This is just the stores taking on in a particular port some more groceries or parts for the engine room, things like that. So how are those things being inspected? You know, how are all the water, alcohol, or eggs and all the food and everything that's going to be loaded? Is there a process for that? So a ship doesn't just drive up and then load it right onto so a truck doesn't just drive up, load it straight onto the vessel, and the vessel's off. Because now you might have some contraband, might be drugs, might be something bomb related, bomb making material, something illegal, weapons. So how is that? What is that process for you? What does that look like? Are there x-rays in your port? Is everything manually searched? What is that process? So a 24/7 monitored CCTV watch standing room. It's a restricted area. It should be restricted. Is the recordings kept? Is there night vision? Is there any sort of motion detection? Is it pan, tilt, zoom capable? If there's cameras that are down and you need to call in the IT department to address the issues. Is there a backup power for your system in case you lose power? Are all areas of the port perimeter being monitored? If there's a fence down or wall down, what are you doing to mitigate that? Or maybe putting a roving patrol or something and checking on that with the CCTV cameras. So that's something to keep in mind. Some ports, facilities use canines. Again, it is a force multiplier. There's nothing in the International Port Facility Security Code that says to use canines. Maybe there's something in your national legislation that does. I don't believe there is at the national level in America, but it's just, again, a tool to help you know, for explosives, that presence, that officer presence when passengers see canine units at the boarding area, they might think twice about bringing illicit. Again, it's the presence. Might not even be a dog. So tender operator. So that tender is going to meet up with the cruise ship. You want to make sure that when that tender lands the people ashore, that is the interface. It's not the cruise ship interface, but it's still the interface that, per the code, needs to have all the same monitoring and expectations that if the cruise ship were to pull in. The tender does not relieve the country that is signatory to the ISPS code. It does not relieve them of those duties. So if your facility accepts vehicles onto it for passengers, again, the screening of those vehicles, is the hood opened? Is the trunk or the bonnet opened? Are there mirrors underneath looking at the vehicle from underneath? Do the passengers get out? Do they stay in? Maybe it's at a random frequency. Maybe every 8th car is checked on, whatever your procedures are. But that's definitely a vulnerable area of a port, is people driving on poor to no vehicle screening. So So segregation of embarking and disembarking passengers, keeping that separate. It shouldn't be one giant waiting area, lobby. These people are coming off the ship, so probably they don't need to be screened. They go right ashore. But these people coming back, we should look at their luggage, any souvenirs, make sure they walk through a metal detector, something like that. So definitely want to segregate that. It should not be one big area where people can commingle. A little bit more about the baggage, depending, on the level of equipment and sophistication that you have in your ports and your facilities, X-ray machines, the same level of maybe screening that the airports employ. A little bit more probably, because now passengers will have access to their luggage, whereas you check your luggage on a flight and you don't have access. But these definitely a major part of the screening process for that contraband, for the narcotics, drugs, alcohol, all the things that the cruise ship passengers might think that they can get away with, take it on board. Just talks about that a little bit more. I think that picture really shows like the level of screening. So I don't know how efficient, this is for you, but it's a large task. But you just imagine a few of those suitcases have contraband in them, and word gets out that bags are the way to go on this cruise line at this port, and now everybody's doing it. Pretty self-explanatory, some of those prohibited items, which sort of leads into CLIA. There are lists of, I recommend you check out the Cruise Line International Association list of prohibited items. These are not all of them. There's many more, I think 25, 30 items that they say or recommend are not, should be prohibited. And so I recommend following that guidance, looking that guidance up. Some temporary barriers for cars and trucks and vendors, for stores, but also for the crew and passengers and the dock workers. So this is multi-purpose. This is safety, and it's also security. Safety, you don't want passengers wandering around, people in wheelchairs being pushed through areas where there's big gantry cranes, things like that, that might not see them. So again, you got your temporary barriers set up ahead of time in anticipation of that arrival. So it's a safety and a security concern. I think a few more slides. So again, officer presence, you got armed security guards, roving patrols, walking around, looking at the perimeters. Again, it's that presence, gives everybody a little bit of peace of mind that things are safe and secure. We got people with radios, radioing back to that command center what the status is, questioning people that might seem lost or in an area where they shouldn't be, but also checking IDs of the dock workers. Like, hey, you're supposed to have a red badge and you have a green badge in this area. Can you explain why you're in this area? And questioning people. So having that presence is key, very key. Looking at the service providers, the people who are, there to sell some souvenirs within the port, and there might be the same face who's been doing it for years, but still, you gotta treat everyone equally. If you're going to check other people's things and belongings, you got to check everyone. So I don't know if you allow people to come up to the ship port interface that close. But you might want to consider as some kind of screening area. Looks like taxis in this picture are very close to the vessel. So how do we know that there's not some kind of surreptitious or someone with ill intent wanting to get right up next to that cruise ship that's not really a taxi but displays a taxi logo? How do you do that? How do you monitor that? So something to keep in mind with barriers, with screening ahead of time. I talked about this a little bit, the pre-screening of the facility prior to the cruise ship's arrival. Maybe the cruise line will send an advance team to conduct a sweep of their cruise ship for their company before the ship arrives. We've seen that a little bit here in America, but having things in place, the barriers, the people, the vendors set, you know, the keeping the passengers segregated, things like that. You want all in place because it's a couple thousand people about to embark and disembark. Access control, I think we hit that pretty good. So some ports designate areas for passengers as opposed to people who are dropping off passengers or things like that. The buses and the taxis might have their own segregated area. Just having these areas identified, labeled, so there's no confusion, eliminate confusion. I think this might be one of the last slides. So drones, we're actually starting to see a little bit of drone activity in some ports, and people are using these to just send, get eyes in the sky. You can go up real high and you can see, you know, another view for that command center. It's just another view for that command center. You got cameras, CCTV cameras throughout the port, right? This is another bird's eye view of the port, and you're just looking around and making sure everything's you know, the way it should be. There's not people wandering around. It's just another tool to consider to provide that overall picture for your port. So port from people who, excuse me, who might be flying them outside the gate and flying them over the gate into the port. You might want to have signage that says, you know, this is not allowed or discouraged, depending on your rules. We definitely do not allow that at ports in America. You cannot fly drones over a regulated facility. Other ports, especially petroleum ports, take that very seriously, but we'll keep the focus here on the cruise ships. But something to consider. I think that wraps up my presentation. So, my question, my last question is, who does this slide not apply to? Yeah, just a little bit of humor. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant, for sharing from the security perspective and on the different cruise ship terminal security best practices. Now I would like to continue with our, thank you. Now I would like to continue with our Q&A session and to invite all of our panelists to join the screen. Please. Thank you. I think we are just missing Captain Ana Laura. Captain, are you there? Yes, now she's here with us. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Now I would like to continue with our Q&A session. And the first question is for Captain Ana Laura. What are the most important challenges Mexican ports are facing after the COVID-19?
Thank you, Monica. There is a consensus of how dangerous having infected people in a cruise ship could be, and also how it's easy to spread worldwide. It is also important to have in mind that COVID-19 is a crisis that has been disseminating fear because of its unprecedented and not known characteristics. However, this industry is capital intensive, has an enormous dependently supply chain, serves and improves many ports of coal economies, hires an immense quantity of people worldwide, and provides leisure and entertainment. For this reason, gaining back consumer confidence and reactivating the entire consumer change has been challenging, but we believe that we are in the right track.
Thank you so much, Captain. Now, our next question is for Jane. What would you list among the major challenges to be tackled in cruise post-pandemic, sorry?
Okay, thank you, Monica. For the most part, I think the safety and security protocols will be covered in cruise ports, as well as onboard the vessels as we return fully to cruise. But I think the major challenge for cruise tourism in general post-pandemic will be for all industry players to really benefit from the return of cruise ships and cruise passengers. The cruise corporations obviously will want to return to profitability sooner rather than later. And that may likely, see them putting some pressure on ports like us to maintain the existing fees and taxes, et cetera. But for small island states like us, the challenge really for ports and others dependent on cruise tourism would be to learn to treat it really as a business in the same way that the cruise corporations do. And that for us means, not only getting a fair share, but also enough benefits that would continue to make cruise tourism a worthwhile venture. So I think in that respect, perhaps a clear business model is needed where we can set our targets and expectations for incomes and methods that would really offset the cost of sustaining cruise tourism.
Thank you so much, Jane. And now our next question is for Lieutenant Commander Librando. What is the role and responsibility of a port facility security officer if a private company provides the port security functions? Example given from front gate guards, roving patrols, monitoring of CCTV cameras, etc.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that question, because we see that sometimes when we go out there to partner countries and we ask, how is this done here? How is this maintained? And sometimes people are quick to say, oh, we have a third party who does that. But I want to caution the the group here. So the port facility security officer is always responsible for the security of their port, and despite maybe having or employing a third party provide some kind of service, that PFSO still must oversee all aspects of their job, provide the training of those personnel. Maybe they're already trained, but maybe they need to be trained a certain way, to be effective at that port because it's unique for whatever reason. They still need to maintain logs and hold drills and exercises, ensure the equipment that is given to these third-party contractors is still available and functioning, that these people are properly trained on this equipment. And then the PFSO still needs to do spot checks and still needs to do audits to make sure it's effective. So just because there's a third party who does your front gate guard duty does not mean the PFSO has limited to no responsibility. They still have a lot.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lieutenant. Now, back to you, Captain Ana Laura. Our next question is, do ports in Mexico have enough information, protocols, and/or mechanisms to cope with a crisis like COVID-19?
Thank you, Monica. There are some initiatives to provide guidelines and frameworks to how to start the travel and tourism sector, from hospitality, outdoor retail, tour operations, attractions, and of course, the port terminals. For example, the World Health Organization published an interim guidance for many COVID-19 cases or outbreaks on board ships. These operational considerations have been detailed by health authorities in several countries and cruise lines. The World Health Organization's guidance recommends cruise lines develop a written plan that covers all activities prior, during, and after sailing. Meaning a suspected case of onboard, meaning contacts tracing, taking measures on board to avoid risk, and cope with the infection, including activities with the Port Health Authority, and conducting outbreak investigation to build knowledge to control and prevent new cases are covered by this guidance. Without a doubt, we have learned some lessons. I truly believe that working together is the key to an effective communication when a crisis arises. That is the reason why the Mexican humanitarian bridges worked. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Captain. Our next question is for Jane. What are some of the factors that will drive economic recovery across the Caribbean region?
Okay, thank you, Monica. I think for sure strong market intelligence systems will be more important than ever to match any industry volatility as it might occur. Adjusting also the cruise tourism product to new preferences as it relates to safety and security strategies, efficiencies, and destination management is necessary if we are to fully participate in a global recovery of cruise. Innovation, obviously, and the adoption of communication and information technologies is no longer optional. And I think also frequent consumer sentiment surveys, that tell us how we're doing, what we're doing right, what we're doing not so great in, would also be useful guides in guiding us through to any recovery efforts.
Thank you so much, Jane. And now our last question for Lieutenant Commander. Are RFID bracelets worn by cruise passengers a best practice for effective access control?
Yeah, so that's something that we see quite often, right? These are little RFID bracelets are tied to the passengers' banks and credit cards, and they can buy things on board, and it's also their identity to come back. And that might be effective for those purposes, for sure. But when you want to look at passengers coming back onto a facility, how do you know that passenger belongs? So something that we see as a best practice is that the cruise ship, somebody from the crew will post somebody at the gate of the facility, and the facility, has to make sure people coming through are clear to come through. So they might have a turnstile or something like that, some kind of X-ray machine. But then the cruise ship crew member also has a manifest, scans the badge or scans the RFID bracelet, things like that. So that way, if an RFID bracelet is lost in town and somebody picks it up and they just come through, they know the data that's associated with it. They're just not beeping and walking through. So that's something that just having the bracelet by itself is not sufficient to look at passengers coming back onto a facility and then ultimately to the cruise ship.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you to all of our panelists that joined us today. It's been an honor to moderate this Q&A session and learning more about the port maritime sector after the pandemic from the cruise ports, from the perspective of cruise ports. Now, I'm turning over to you, Jorge.
Well, thank you very much, Monica, and thank you very much to all our speakers. I know that officially we've concluded the Q&A session, but Hans Rook from the International Port Community System, Association, PCSA, International Port Community System Association, has made a question here that I am curious about, and I'd like to take this opportunity to ask Ana Laura, to ask Jane, and to ask Daniel, just for a quick reply to this. And I'll go ahead and I'll read the question. It says, as per January of 2024, the IMO has declared that no forms anymore must be used to exchange data and information, but everything must be done electronically using an electronic maritime single window, or MSW. So his question is, and I know, obviously, I said at the beginning of this webinar that we are working with Barbados to establish a PCA in Barbados. So those guys are on track. And as he says here, he knows of Darwin Telemac's maritime single window in Antigua and Barbuda. But he wonders what your opinion might be on the other Caribbean ports, on the rest of the region. And so let me ask, in the order that I said, I'll keep the order. We'll first ask Captain Lopez what the Mexican ports, if they are ready to be paperless, to go into effect in 2024, and then I'll ask Jane, and then Daniel. So, Ana Laura, por favor.
Jorge, not in this moment, but we are working and doing the necessary things to be ready in that time.
Exactly. That's exactly right. This is not until January 2024. So ports and countries still have over a year to prepare for this. So thank you very much. Jane, how is Barbados doing? Although I know the answer to that one.
Well, thanks, Jorge. You know, we are advancing with our MSW. We are actually fairly advanced. We've completed the development of the platform, the software that's necessary. And we're actually working with integrating communications with the other partner agencies who have to be on board for the full functioning of the MSW. We have already proceeded in advancing the proclamation of the legislation. So that really is only the final step that we need to take to get that legislation approved and proclaimed to effect the full functioning of the MSW.
Indeed. Thank you very much. I'm going to take this opportunity to make a couple of comments. First, even though Captain Lopez has informed us that the Mexican ports are not ready at the moment, let me tell the audience that the asiponas that she mentioned at the beginning of her presentation, they all, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they all had maritime single windows. There is already an electronic component at work in all the Mexican ports, but you need to increase it in order to get rid of the paper. Is that right? Am I right, Captain, on that? Yes. Okay, I see her nodding.
Yes, it is.
Yes, beautiful. So it's not that Mexico is starting from zero. It's just that they have MSWs and they need to ramp them up. So thank you very much. And finally, Commander Daniel. Is it Daniel or Daniel?
Daniel, that's fine.
Daniel, all right. Like, okay, so Daniel, what in your opinion, now your opinion is a different one because you're sort of the, 30,000 feet and you can see all the countries and all the region as a whole. And with this of paperless transactions that have been indeed accelerated by the pandemic. There was a process that was already taking place in Latin America and the Caribbean of digitizing port operations, but the pandemic has obviously increased the pace and forced our hands in many ways to do that. So what do you think? Do you think the region as a whole looks good for 2024?
That's a tough question. I really I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that level of a question. I'd be lying if I said that this wasn't something that is new to me. I really have not seen this yet too much out there. Maybe that's not the scope of our work. We're really focused on that. And I certainly can't answer it for how United States ports are handling that, because that's not my side of the
right. Well, instead, Daniel, let me ask you a question that comes from Captain Miguel Angel Osuna of the Mexican Port University.
Okay.
And he says he just wonders. He says, pre and post pandemic, basically, is his question. Have there been changes to port security inspections on your part? How
That's a great question. I mean, the COVID affected everybody, and personally and professionally affected everybody differently. So, right, there's a lull there. There's a down period where maybe ports and facilities cannot do in-person drills and in-person exercises because everybody's in lockdown, or everybody's quarantined and whatnot. So, right, we certainly take that into consideration in terms of when we go and evaluate. For sure, that's across the board. Um, did your port shut down? Well, it didn't. So then, how did you maintain it? And it's more from a place of curiosity. We're just curious, how did you maintain it? And then we can, as a group, discuss: is it still effective, or was it not effective? So it's kind of a case by case. It's weird. It's an odd time, right? So
Right. Absolutely. Well, thank you. Let me, as I thank our speakers, I'd like to just briefly make another comment that was brought up to my mind by Jane's comments of all we need now is the legislation. Well, for those of us watching and for the audience, please take this into consideration. I try to plug in my computer so it doesn't turn itself off, and there we go. And she spoke about legislation. Now, I will tell you, as my mother would say, I'll tell you the sin, but not the sinner. And in my experience, I worked with a port or terminal or whatever, and they went ahead and developed a whole digital platform to conduct their operations. And just before they launched it, lo and behold, they found out that there was no existing national legislation that allowed for digital signature, for example. There was no legislation that allowed for the protection of your data while as it made digital. So they had to stop it, and they had to go back and push Congress and their legislative bodies to come up with the right legislation so that then they could implement the digital processes. So I just mentioned this as a learning lesson for all of those who are thinking about modernizing, about digitizing. Go ahead, do the work, but do not forget the most important, or one of the most important elements, which is that legal foundation, that legal basis that you will need in order to proceed. So with that said, I'd like to express my deepest thanks and appreciation to all of you. Let's change it a little bit, and I'll give the floor to Daniel so he can say his goodbyes, then Jane, and then Ana Laura at the end, and then you'll give it back to me to close it up. So Daniel, please go ahead and give us a goodbye.
Okay, thank you everyone for listening to what I had to say. Like I began my presentation with, hope you took one or two things out of it. To me, that'd be successful if you got one or two things out of my presentation. But appreciate it. Thank you for the floor. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm sure you'll see myself or my crew in your port or facility in your country soon. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Daniel. And I did, in fact, take more than one or two things off your presentation. You can be sure of that. So thank you. Jane?
Thank you, Jorge. Just like Daniel, I'd like to express my thanks for having invited Barbados Port Inc. to be a part of this forum today. We really enjoyed being here, learning from some of the presentations from the other delegates as well. And we hope similarly that you would have learned something and taken some insights away from the lessons that we shared from the Port of Bridgetown. So thank you.
Absolutely, Jane. Thank you very much. I think one of the several lessons I learned is you're number one. Put people first. I love that one. It's put people first, and then we can talk about the rest. So I very much like that. Thank you. And last but not least, Ana Laura.
Thank you very much again, Jorge, because your invitation to this webinar. Thank you very much to, especially for my team. Thanks for all.
Yes, indeed. To everybody's team, thank you. Thank you so much for your support. I will now sort of close this up. Hans, thank you for your question. Capio Zuna, muchas gracias por la pregunta también. I hope, remember, as Monica said, the presentations and the recording will be available at the portal. In fact, she's already shared that link in the chat. But if not, you can go to portalcip.org and find it there. So with that and all, and running a little bit late, 15 minutes late almost, I thank everybody for their attention and their patience. And again, thank you to Mexico, Barbados, and the United States for helping us do this webinar. And thank you for Monica and Real ID for the tech and the organization. Thank you all, and we will see you soon.
Thank you so much for joining.
En Real ID, somos un equipo apasionado y comprometido que mediante la tecnología del entretenimiento participa en el desarrollo social y profesional de nuestros clientes, ofreciendo un servicio integral que responda a los nuevos retos y logre presencia activa en el comercio internacional. Aseguramos a nuestros clientes el correcto balance entre requerimientos para que nuestras plataformas tengan un óptimo desempeño. Buscamos la solución precisa para la convivencia de sistemas heredados y, en su caso, desarrollar la aplicación necesaria. Real ID creció acompañado y gracias a las necesidades del medio marítimo y portuario en cuestión de protección y seguridad. Cada uno de nuestros módulos está administrado por una inteligencia artificial simulada llamada Soleil, capaz de aprender casos y encontrar soluciones según los requerimientos del usuario final.